Russian President Vladimir Putin has met with a U.S. delegation inside the Kremlin for talks aimed at moving closer to ending the war in Ukraine. U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Donald Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner presented a revised version of a 28-point peace plan that had been criticized for being too closely aligned to Russian war goals. Ukraine requested the revisions and has now tentatively backed the new draft. The Kremlin described the talks as useful, but said there had been no compromise on territory. Ahead of the meeting, the Russian leader rejected what he said were European demands, and he warned European leaders that Russia was ready for war if that's what they wanted.
They are on the side of the war. Even when they try to supposedly introduce some changes to Trump's proposal, we see clearly what they're doing. All these changes are aimed at only one thing: to completely block the entire peace process by putting forward demands that are absolutely unacceptable to Russia. They understand this. By doing so, they then intend to blame Russia for the collapse of this peace process. That's their goal. We see this clearly.
Earlier, Ukraine's President Zelensky said the talks in Moscow would determine whether the war could be ended. He was speaking during a state visit to Ireland.
There is a lot of dialogue, but we need results. Our people die every day. With all due respect to all nations of the world, those that help us and those that sadly don't, it is Ukrainians who keep dying. The dialogue can go on, but we need results. We can either chit-chat or achieve the maximum to bring the end of the war closer. I'm ready to receive all signals, ready to meet with President Trump. It all depends on today's talks.
John Hardie is the Deputy Director of the Russia Program at the Washington-based think tank, the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Welcome back to DW. Both sides agreed not to disclose the substance of these talks in Moscow. Realistically, what could have come out of this meeting?
Yeah, so I think the Kremlin likely made clear that there's not much wiggle room from their perspective on certain key demands. Heard Witkoff in his remarks to the press afterwards stressed the importance for Moscow's view of that Ukrainian withdrawal from the Donbass region, eastern Ukraine, one of the key demands that President Putin is making. I think a win from Moscow, and it was clear there was not going to be any final resolution reached here, but a win from Moscow's perspective could be to channel these talks into kind of a structured diplomatic process where you have working groups and they each kind of tackle a respective issue. And then I think, obviously Moscow would hope that process would steer it kind of toward their preferred outcome.
So if Moscow's getting its way, particularly with objections, what will the U.S. do?
Well, I think these days it all depends on who's running the show in the White House. If it's Witkoff, and we clearly know what his kind of preferred formula is, which is to pressure Ukraine into capitulating to Russia as kind of the speediest way to get a deal. I think Secretary Rubio sees things a little more clearly, understands that the Russians are going to have to face pressure if they're going to make compromises that would make a deal possible. At the end of the day, try as it might, the White House does not have the leverage to make Zelensky capitulate on certain key issues like territory, certain aspects of sovereignty. So the Ukrainians are going to have to buy into this.
And what should we make of the words from the Russian president saying, talking about the European leaders, saying that they're on the side of war and saying he doesn't want to fight with Europe, but says it's ready if they want a war?
Yeah, obviously a lot of bravado there. I wouldn't read too much into that. But in general, I think Putin is trying to split the United States off from its European allies, wants to do a deal over the heads of Europe and Ukraine. And I think it is just trying to kind of foment and accelerate this break between the United States and Europe so that at the end of the day, Russia will have a freer hand to bully its neighbors like Ukraine and others.
Right, so if Russia's not budging, and of course Ukraine holds to its refusal to give up territory, do you see a risk of a never-ending war?
Well, after all, this war is a continuation war from the 2014-2015 war. I think, unfortunately, however this current war ends, if it does, there's a strong likelihood of a third war. All these wars are really wars of Soviet succession. This kind of struggle over whether Ukraine and other of its neighbors have the right to be independent from Moscow. That's a generational struggle. It's going to take time to resolve. And I think, no matter where, if we do get a deal that ends this war, I hope we do, it likely will not be the last word in this conflict. And so it'll really fall to the Ukrainians, but also their Western partners to help make Ukraine a steel porcupine after this current conflict and try to deter or, if necessary, defeat a future Russian re-invasion.
Okay. John Hardie from the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, thank you very much for speaking to us.
Thank you.
Well, let's see what we can expect with Mikhail Alexeev, who's a professor of political science and expert on Russia and Ukraine from San Diego State University in the United States. Welcome to DW, Professor. We heard the Ukrainian president there saying lots of dialogue, but we need results. Are you expecting results from this meeting in Moscow?
It is very hard to expect the good results from these negotiations. Any indication that we see, particularly from Putin's latest statements, is that the Kremlin's position remains the same. It's that they want to gain physically more territory in Ukraine. They want Ukraine to give up territory that Ukraine still controls. And they want, in essence, to subjugate Ukraine and to deny its sovereignty. So these conditions are completely unacceptable to Ukraine. Ukrainians know what happens in the occupied territories. They don't want to live under a rule like Putin's or under some kind of puppet regime subservient to Russia. And so they will keep fighting. So it's very hard to see how these negotiations will result in a ceasefire or peaceful resolution.
So what do you think America's next move would be then if Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner come back with nothing but a suitcase full of Russian objections?
It seems to me, and that's, I think, also why Jared Kushner is there, that Trump's strategy, which he modifies and changes as he goes along, is to try to entice Putin to agree to at least a ceasefire by giving Russia some positive incentives in terms of reopening business, in terms of some new deals, in terms of removing sanctions. But I don't think that these kinds of, and then put the pressure on Ukraine. But that strategy, I don't think will work given these kinds of conflicts, given these kinds of huge disagreements between the sides. So for the United States, there will be, in essence, two options. One would be to give up, to, in essence, withdraw most of the role it's playing, but it's not going to be easy because that would make Trump look weak. And the other option would be to return to Trump's strategy of putting more pressure on Moscow. And perhaps following up on Secretary of State Rubio's words, who said the problem is with Moscow and we need to deal with that. And that may come in the form of actually increased sanctions and increased military support for Ukraine.
Okay. So we have the two options as you see it: America increasing its support for Ukraine and increasing sanctions against Russia, or America walking away from this and looking weak. Let's look at that first option, because if the United States were to walk away from this conflagration, is there any expectation that Europe could step up and put out this fire on its own doorstep?
It would be extremely difficult for Europe, but not impossible. We have seen developments in Ukraine itself. that we see the increase in the percent of military capability that Ukraine uses that is actually Ukrainian. We have seen Ukraine develop some longer range capabilities that can hurt Russia's military industrial complex and military capabilities. Europe can step up in many ways that would help Ukraine signal to Russia that the ongoing war is costly.
And so Ukraine then, if nothing particularly constructive comes out of this leaves Ukraine just fighting on until someone somewhere, either in Washington or somewhere in Europe, makes a decision?
Well, it can also be, yes, it will have to be some kind of coalition, some kind of collective decision. Ukraine cannot do it all on its own. But there are some developments that may significantly help Ukraine. Very importantly, the use of Russian frozen assets in Europe, long overdue indeed. And that kind of move would be something that would signal to Putin that Western support is more than words and negotiations, that Russia will bear further costs. And these would be the kinds of things that may make Moscow shift toward a different position. Another one would be stepping up efforts for joint military production. They've been ongoing, joint ventures between Ukraine and West European companies to produce armaments and ammunition. And these kinds of efforts are also probably watched by Moscow, and the stepping up would also create that kind of extra cost for Putin.
Right. And your thoughts on those words from the Russian president that European leaders are on the side of war and saying he doesn't want to fight with Europe, but he's ready if they want one?
Well, it's basically part of that message that he's sending that, hey, you know, we may have some kind of understanding with the United States, but it's the Europeans who are making it more difficult. And it's also designed as a way to bluff and blackmail Europe into not supporting Ukraine. It's from the same kind of arsenal of rhetoric that Putin used since the beginning of his invasion, full-scale invasion in 2022, when at that time he threatened Europe and other countries with consequences, quote, never before seen in history, unquote, if they militarily support Ukraine. And we, of course, know that nothing of the sort materialized. So this is, again, to sow divisions within Europe, to undermine support for Ukraine, and to give more sort of rationale for Trump to put pressure on Ukraine to accept Putin's maximalist demands.
Right, thanks for talking us through that, Professor. Professor Mikhail Alexeev from San Diego State University. Orysia Lutsevych is Deputy Director of the Russia and Eurasia Programme and Head of Ukraine Forum at the Chatham House International Affairs think tank. She joins us from London. Welcome back to DW. Do you see this current series of talks about a deal in Ukraine as being any more likely to actually produce a ceasefire or even a peace deal than any of the other talks that have happened in the last 4 years?
Well, we clearly see quite high-intensity talks taking place at the highest level, mandated by President Trump, who is, to be honest, in a hurry to rush through the finish line, as he soon will celebrate 1 year in office, and not being able to deliver on his electoral pledge to end this war in 24 hours. So somebody who is in a hurry is clearly a U.S. president, while President of Russia is clearly not in a hurry and is saying that he's prepared to fight and to take more land by force from Ukraine, but he doesn't want to upset President Trump, so Russia is playing this game along. To be honest, I think it would be reckless to think that the peace is around the corner and in any way to relax either military or financial assistance to Ukraine. Right.
Russia now claims to have made territorial gains in recent weeks. It's now claiming to have captured the key city of Pokrovsk. Ukraine, of course, disputes this, but regardless of the truth of Russian claims, could they work in Putin's favor? Is there a narrative building of Russian progress?
Well, absolutely. The front line is not moving in Kiev's favor. It's actually moving in Russia's favor. It's a very glacial, very slow success. Russia has succeeded to occupy only 1% additional of Ukrainian territory throughout all of 2025. But this feeds Putin's hopes that he will be able to achieve his goals militarily if Ukraine does not concede to his territorial grab at the negotiating table. And we hear him saying that he is prepared to continue the fight. So his calculus is emboldened by these marginal successes on the battlefield. And also he is quite insulated, and the quality of the information he gets is not always accurate to what is actually happening on the battlefield, because his generals are often reporting to him future successes, not actually the current state of the battlefield.
Vladimir Zelensky described the 2 days of negotiation between Ukrainian and US officials as constructive. Are you any clearer on what progress has been made in turning that original 28-point plan into something less objectionable to Ukraine?
Well, the success so far of Ukraine has been to quickly mobilize European alliance in support of its red lines that were violated by this 28-point plan. And these red lines are referring to the ceasefire that should be established along the current front line. It's about non-recognition of any Russian territorial acquisitions, neither by Ukraine nor by Europe. And it's an important principle of unlimited sovereignty, full sovereignty of Ukraine, that is important for its future defense and deterrence of Russia and for its integration with the European Union. I think Americans are gradually becoming on board with this, but we don't know whether Russians will accept this deal. Judging from Putin's, again, public statements in Bishkek recently, he says that President Zelensky is illegitimate and the deal is not possible because it does not have a legitimate partner in Kiev. So it doesn't seem like Americans will be making much progress today.
Okay. And can we speculate about US motivations in all this deal-making? You talked about Donald Trump being in a rush to get this done before his first year in office. There's also long been this suspicion that beyond a Nobel Peace Prize, he's using these negotiations as a way to furthering American business interests. Do those suspicions hold any water as far as you're concerned?
Yes, I think it's one of the clear motivations, and a carrot that Trump is proposing to Russia is to engage in a mutual business deal, especially around energy in the Arctics and trade. It's more of a goodwill gesture from America, but also for Trump organization and his family. Let's see that Jared Kushner and Witkoff's son, they have dealt with Russia before. They've been doing both commercial, real estate and other deals together, and they could get quite profitable opportunities around Russia, mineral resources and energy. So it is one of the motivations. But most important, I think, for Trump is to demonstrate that he can be a peacemaker, that he can deliver on his promises, and to come into the pre-electoral campaign. In America, there will be a midterm elections to the Senate, and to come in a stronger position to show that he can actually deliver the impossible.
So is there a danger that this goal of doing business deals with Putin's Russia ends up overriding Ukrainian and indeed European interests?
Well, I think both Ukraine and Europe are facing the US crisis, where so much that is at stake for Ukraine and Europe is discussed behind Ukraine's and Europe's backs. And the quite dangerous propositions seem to be endorsed even as a plan by President Trump. For example, about changing the charter of NATO upon Russia's request, or deciding on what is the size of Ukrainian armed forces. So I think Europe is waking up to a different America. France, Germany, and United Kingdom have to deal with this reality that Trump's White House is is disengaging from not only securing Europe, but possibly creating a situation that would endanger a future security and embolden Russia.
Right. So as the Trump White House rushes to get this deal done, do you think there is a limit to American patience with this process? What happens when, if Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner come out of these meetings with nothing more than a briefcase full of Russian objections and obfuscations?
Well, I think from the very beginning of this high intense diplomacy, where it was clear that America is okay with any kind of ending of the war without taking too much into consideration European or Ukraine's positions, that it's a game of who will upset Trump first. Both sides, Kyiv and Moscow, are trying to play along. For the same matter, Europe. Yes, the worst case scenario is that United States could discontinue intelligence support to Ukraine, which is important for deep strikes into Russia and for visibility of its air defense. But also, for the same matter, it could America could impose secondary sanctions on those countries purchasing Russian oil. So it is unclear into which side the balance will tilt. It's a very risky game for both sides. But I think Ukraine-European alliance still has a good chance in convincing Trump that he can only pursue peace through force with Putin, and that they are also prepared to put serious resources on the table to back Ukraine militarily and to strengthen Kyiv's negotiating position on the battlefield, to make sure that the line of contact at least stops or is moving actually in Ukraine's favor.
That's very clear. Thank you for talking us through that, Orysia Lutsevych from Chatham House.